I don't know if you can tell how dark it is at the moment. I mean, you probably can because of this very artificial lighting situation that I don't think is actually helping all of that much. But it is 3 p.m. Like, 3 p.m. That's the daytime, and it is so dark. As a winter baby, you think I would like the dark winter times more? No, I do not. I don't enjoy this. Anyways, hi everyone, my name is Leanne, and today I'm going to be bringing you my October reading wrap-up, better late than never. Before I get into the books, I do want to do a little bit of quick housekeeping because there are going to be some very interesting links down below in the description box. I always try to link the books that I've spoken about in the description box of my videos, so if you want to find out more about those books, you can. And from now on, I'm going to be linking to bookshop.org, who are a really great site that provide a way for you to support independent bookstores while buying books online. The links I've included down below are affiliate links, so you will be supporting independent bookstores and me, should you decide to buy any books online. But also a disclaimer that if you do want to support a particular independent bookstore, it's always best to buy from them directly, but I think bookshop.org provide a really fantastic alternative to other like e-commerce sites. Speaking of alternatives to those particular retailers, I'm also going to include a link to my Storygraph page down below, which is basically like an alternative to Goodreads that is way better and way more aesthetically pleasing and provides you with loads of data about the books that you've read. I'm not going to stop using Goodreads for the minute, but I would like to maintain both sites and gradually entirely shift over to Storygraph. Seeing as we are now in the midst of nonfiction November, I'm going to kick things off by talking about the nonfiction books that I read in October. Starting with Vagina A Reeducation by Leanne. Since I did my nonfiction November TBR, I feel like books about like sex and various related topics are becoming my brand, and I'm completely okay with that, and I'm really gonna lean into it. I'm not going to talk about this one in too much detail because I am going to be doing a full video where I talk about lots of books related to this topic, but I thought this book was really great. The idea behind this book is basically breaking down a lot of myths that we have been taught about vaginas, things like the hymen, where we have an idea about what it is that isn't really accurate at all. There's stuff about periods, there's stuff about pain, about fertility. It goes down into like the specific different parts of the vagina and the vulva, so like there's a chapter on the clitoris. The author does acknowledge that a lot of the data she uses isn't always inclusive of the trans experience. That's because that data doesn't exist. Like there's so little research done about kind of like vaginal health and that kind of thing, and what does exist is from cis women. I think if you are interested in learning more about this topic, this is really thoroughly and fantastically researched. I learned a lot from it, and I am someone who feels like I kind of know a lot about this topic already, so there was something in there for me to learn about as well. And now I also have an idea of topics that I want to explore some more as well. Next, I have 3 nonfiction books that are all from the same series from the same publisher. This is the Outspoken series from Pluto Press. Sticking on a similar kind of topic, I read Behind Closed Doors, Sex Education Transformed by Natalie Fines. So I went into this book with slightly the wrong perception. I thought this was a book about like the topic of sex education and like into like schools and educational institutes and the history of sex being taught as a subject matter. That's not what this book is about. It is itself a sex education, so it is a book about sex. Again, it's broken down into lots of different topics, so we're looking at gender identity, at consent, at contraception. There's stuff in here about sexual violence, there's stuff about pornography, sex work, and relationships. Again, this is one that was really thoroughly well researched, and I would highly recommend it if you are interested in these kinds of topics. I also read Off Masculinity Redefined by J.J. Bola. This was the first book I actually read in this series, and once I finished reading this, I really wanted to read the other 2 books, because the thing that I really love about this series is how kind of it's really well researched, but that research is presented in a really accessible way. This one is all about masculinity, how masculinity differs across the world, and how things in one culture we might consider feminine or unmasculine are considered really masculine in other countries, and how it's just a social construct. I think this book could be really liberating for people who find themselves constrained by the kind of restrictions that masculinity sets on them. The author gave me a lot to think about as someone who, you know, as a cisgender feminine woman. Like, I don't know what the experience of feeling so restricted by your masculinity. I don't know what that feels like, and the author gave me a lot of things to think about in that regard. And I think this book really helped me understand my kind of like laddie friends a lot better. I am someone who has spent a lot of time in my life kind of explaining patriarchy and toxic masculinity to men and trying to like help them understand that the things that so negatively affect men, things like men being told, you know, not to share their emotions, not to cry from such a young age, it's actually because of the patriarchy. But I think this book really helped me understand why some of those conversations weren't getting through to people. I also read Feminism Interrupted, Disrupting Power by Lola Olufemi. I feel like this book is really great for people who feel like they have quite a solid base understanding of feminism and are looking for something really nuanced in a way that is supportive of feminism but really points out the problems with it as well. Not with feminism itself, but with how a lot of people kind of do their feminism. Things like white feminism and why that is not helpful. Like really consumerist feminism, like, you know, having a girl power t-shirt. Like, is that really as feminist as the person wearing it thinks it is? It's really inclusive of lots of different women's experiences, especially women of colour. I highly recommend all three of these books, to be honest. I also read Take It As a Compliment by Maria Stowen, and this, I guess, comes under non-fiction. This is an illustrated kind of graphic depiction of lots of people's real life accounts of their experiences of sexual assault and sexual harassment. It is inclusive of a lot of different kinds of people's experiences. I think you would have to be in quite a secure place to read this book, because I did feel like when reading these experiences and watching how thoughtfully and carefully they are illustrated, I did feel kind of anxious. But you know, if that's something you are interested in reading about, in kind of finding out more about people's experiences and just kind of listening to them, like just kind of bearing witness to an account of these people's experiences, I do think it's really worth reading. Of course, in October we had Victober. I didn't do very well, as per usual. I didn't read the George Eliot I was meant to read. I made a dent. I read like 100 pages of A Tale of Two Cities, which I'm kind of pleased with, to be fair. The one book I did finish was Under the Greenwood Tree by Thomas Hardy, and it was fine. Like, it was fine. So this book is set in the English village of Mellstock, and there's kind of two plots going on. There's kind of the internal conflicts of the church choir and the new vicar that has, you know, different ideas about the direction he wants the choir to go in. And then there's the other plot, which is like the romance plot, which is centered around the very beautiful and charismatic, apparently, Fancy Day, and the three different men who are interested in marrying her. So we have the Reverend. What's the difference between a Reverend and a vicar? We have Dick Dewey, who every time someone is called Dick in a Victorian book, I just can't help but find it so funny. But he, like, doesn't come from a wealthy background, and that's, you know, something that Fancy Day has to consider in whether she would be interested in marrying him. And then there's also a very, like, wealthy farmer that is also interested in her. So, you know, girl's got a lot on her plate. And I thought that dynamic was interesting in that, like, she's weighing up the different, like, pros and cons about all of these different men. It's a bit boring. Like, there's nothing bad about this book, there's really not, and I did enjoy reading it at the time, but like, that's really all I can say about it. I'm sorry. Let's do the fiction for grown-ups next. Next I have A Love Story for Bewildered Girls by Emma Morgan, and I feel like I really should have liked this book more than I did. It was another one that I felt very underwhelmed by. This book follows three young women who are exploring themselves through their relationships. One of them finds the man that she thinks, like, her mother would have always wanted her to be with. One of them falls for a woman at first sight. And the third woman finds herself falling for another woman despite having always been in relationships with men. And I didn't find any of the three of them particularly interesting. There's nothing really stand out about any of these plots, and normally that's actually something that I'm really okay with. Like, I am kind of really pleased to just take a glimpse into someone's life for a little while, even if there isn't a major plot. But I think because we're split between the three women, I didn't find myself really invested in any of them. When I put this book down, I didn't find myself wanting to go back to it. Normally this is the type of thing that I would really, really love. It's got queer rep in it, it is focused on relationships but also female friendships. I feel like possibly if we just took one of the women and focused a whole novel on her situation, then I would have liked it a lot more. And I don't even mind which of the women that would be. I think just because the novel was split between the three of them, I didn't get enough from any of them to massively care. I don't know. I feel like this is a book that, like, I would have really expected to love, which is a shame. The Firestarters is by Jan Carson. This book is not what I thought it would be, in, like, the best way. So this is a book that is about violence in Northern Ireland, specifically in East Belfast, And one of the things we're following in this book is this individual who has been deemed the fire starter because they are starting a number of fires. It's, you know, pretty self-explanatory of a title. Across Belfast, you know, it's obviously massively violent and antisocial behaviour. Videos are being uploaded onto YouTube of these fires. And that's kind of going on in the background of this novel while we follow two male protagonists, the first of which is called Sammy, who is the father of 3 children. He was a loyalist parliamentarian, terrorising Catholics with guns and violence, and he's kind of grappling with the trauma that he has and the guilt that he has after that. We're also following Dr. Jonathan Murray, who finds himself a single father to a child that has a lot of complicated things going on. I don't really want to... How do I talk about this book? This book has magical and wondrous elements to it that I did not anticipate, that I found so captivating. And ultimately what this novel is about 2 fathers who want to try to do their best to protect their children but just don't know how to do that. Reading about fatherhood is something that I really appreciate in literature. There's also a lot of discussion around men's mental health in this book as well, and I think how the lives of these characters were interwoven was really interesting. So while this was a book that I thought I was going to love and kind of just liked, this was a book that I thought I was going to like but didn't anticipate to love as much as I did. Next I have Essays in Love by Alain de Botton. This was originally written in 1993 when the author, I think, was only like 23 or 24 years old, and it follows what happens when a young man and a young woman meet on a flight from Paris to London and they fall in love. They get into a relationship together and we follow on from that. We follow from the man's perspective, his kind of journey with falling for this girl and building a life and a relationship with her. And honestly, that's kind of the long and short of the plot. But I think what is really interesting about this book is how it prompts you to think about your own approaches to things like that. Like, we follow this male character as, I think he really falls for the idea of this girl rather than who she actually is. We see him become really aggravated by aspects of her personality and her interests, as if they're completely contradictory to her nature, but they're not. They're just contradictory to the idea he built up of her in his head. She never really pretended to be anything different than who she was. We follow him becoming like really stressed about the relationship, and like he never seems to sink into it and enjoy it because he's always just so stressed about it, and he's always like micro-analyzing everything. He's kind of at the point in his life, and I think the girl is as well, where they kind of have to make decisions about how they're going to approach relationships, and I think that's kind of a decision that a lot of people make around that point in their life, and it's one of the things that makes dating at this kind of age so difficult, is people are choosing between whether they want to kind of mess around a little bit more, which, you know, it's perfectly fine if someone wants to do that, or if they want to start working towards, you know, building something for a future together. And neither of them really make that decision. They kind of feel like they kind of fall into this committed relationship, and once they're in it, they don't really know what to do with it. I think it's a book that's really interesting to discuss. It is very philosophical. There were some points in it where I was like, okay, I feel like we might be overthinking this, but I do think it's one that prompts a lot of thought and discussion about how you feel about romance and love and relationships. So because it is very philosophical, I think like your response to it is more interesting than the book itself. I also read Another Brooklyn by Jacqueline Woodson, and I'm not sure how much I can really tell you about this book. I read it at the start of the month, and I don't know how much I really remember about it. It is another book that follows 3 female characters and is like focused on female friendship, and I was also kind of indifferent to it, which is, you know, kind of sucks, because that's something that I really love in books, and I've been disappointed by it twice in one reading month. It's set in 1970s Brooklyn, and it follows the experiences and the friendship between these girls. Are there 4 girls? Not 3? That's how little I remember. But this book is so short, and again, I feel like there just wasn't enough, you know? So I'm disappointed. I do love Jacqueline Woodson as a writer. I have read 3 of her other books and enjoyed those much more than this one. I also read Hag, which was a collection of short stories from lots of different writers, including Emer McBride, Kirsty Logan. My favourite story was the first story in the collection, which was by Daisy Johnson, and I do have her novel Everything Under on my shelf, so I'm very keen to read that after reading her short story. That did mean like the rest of the collection kind of fell a little bit flat for me because The first story I absolutely loved. I really love metafiction, but nonetheless, I really did enjoy this collection. And I just really love the concept behind it as well. So each story is a retelling of a mythological story from somewhere in the British Isles. These are stories that aren't widely known by any means. I think you would only kind of know them if this particular kind of mythology is like your kind of specialist subject, or if you are from those particular regions where the stories come from. There are loads of different experiences explored in these stories. They are very female focused, which I did enjoy. There's stuff about identity, faith, religion, sexuality. Some of them are more supernatural than others, as is the nature of a short story collection. There were some stories that I didn't really connect to, but that's just, you know, the nature of having an anthology with lots of different writers in it. I would be really keen to get a physical copy of this book as well, because it is just so beautiful. And I read 2 books for younger readers this month. I'm going to start with Blubber by Judy Blume. I have been gradually working my way through a lot of Judy Blume's books. She isn't an author that I read a lot of as a child. I read a lot of Jacqueline Wilson, and Judy Blume is kind of the American equivalent, I guess, is a way of thinking about her writing. So stories focused on like teens and tweens, the particular struggles that can be faced by people when they are this age, and aspects of class and difference are really looked at in Judy Blume's books. This book is really about bullying. So there is a girl in this class called Linda who is repeatedly picked on and called Blubber. I'm sure you can fill in the gaps and figure out why they have given her such a cruel nickname. It really looks at how cruel kids can be, and we are following this book from the perspective of, I guess, not the chief bully, but someone who kind of goes along with it in order to kind of maintain a level of like social status. And we see how quickly things turn for this character. This isn't my favourite of Judy Blume's books that I've read, but I am really enjoying reading my way through a lot of her work. The only one I have left on my shelf now is Forever, which I've kind of been building up to because I know it's kind of her most famous book, I guess. I also read Boy Queen by George Lester. I loved this book. I love that there are books like this out there now for queer teenagers. I love that so much. Books that don't shy away from the difficulties that gay teens face, but equally don't portray the coming out experience as something that is always going to be traumatic. In this novel we follow Robin, and when we are introduced to Robin, he has already come out. Like, his mom knows that he's gay, his friends know that he's gay. At the start of the novel he is rejected from this like drama school that he wanted to go to, and he finds himself not really knowing what he wants to do next. You know, all of his friends have university plans and he doesn't know what he's doing. And then he discovers the world of drag, and it sparks so much joy for him. Robin is such a wonderful character to spend time with. You know, he does have his flaws, he definitely does, because he feels like a real person. His mother, while also incredibly supportive, isn't perfect. No parent is. I loved all of the relationships in this book. I think they all contributed something to the story. All of the characters felt really distinctive and genuine and honest. I inhaled this book. I just enjoyed it so much. This was a book that when I put it down, I was like, no, I need to go back to this book. Wish books like this existed when I and many other teenagers were very confused. Love it. And finally, I read a poetry collection. I read Ain't Never Not Been Black by Javon Johnson. This is a poetry collection about the experiences of being black, specifically in America, and also the intersection of experiences in being black and being a man. There's a real focus on this collection in turning toxic masculinity into positive masculinity, and I actually think reading this collection quite soon after reading Mask Off by JJ Bola was a really interesting reading experience. So that is something that I would recommend. It's a book about fatherhood and also how blackness and survival are so interlinked. I think if you like the poetry of Jericho Brown, I think you would really like this collection because it explores black masculinity. So if you are a poetry fan and are interested in learning more about those kind of experiences, or seeing those experiences that may be familiar to you reflected back, I would really recommend this collection. So there we have it. This is what I read in October. It's a pretty decent reading month, I think. There were like obviously a few books that I was kind of slightly indifferent to, but I did read a lot of good stuff last month. If you have any thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned, do leave me a comment down below, or leave me a little emoji if you have nothing specific to say. Do be sure to check out the links down below in the description if any of them sound interesting to you, and if you want to hear more of my thoughts about books in the future, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video.